So, John Rutter, you are, well, one can say the most celebrated composers of our time of choral music. You've written all kinds of music, large choral works, Gloria, Requiem, Mass of the Children, The Gift of Life, and many others, and numerous carols. So at Christmas time, I think mainly in English-speaking countries, your work is sung all over the world. Can you tell us what's to you special about writing for the human voice?
Oh, well, it was the instrument I started with. I always wanted to sing. When I was just 4 years old, my first school report said, John sings well if he sings softly. Wenn leise singt, dann ist es gut. And so I guess I liked showing off even then. And what I loved about singing was it brought me together with the other children in the school in a way that I couldn't join in because sport is a great group activity, football in England, cricket and so on. And I was terrible at sport, and really bad. And it was lovely to be part of a team when I was singing. And I felt that when I added my voice to the other children's voices, it added up to something more than the sum of the parts. Something magical happened. And so when I went into the senior school, it was not a question of trying to tempt me into the school chapel choir. They would have had to struggle to keep me out because I always wanted to sing. So it was only a short step, really, from singing music in choir to wanting to write music of my own for choir. And to this day, when I write for choir, I feel that in a sense, I'm coming home.
Let's go back to your early choir singing experiences. You just said you started at the age of 4 and sang in a choir for the first time. Do you recall that feeling you had when everybody else around you started singing with you together?
Oh, I wish that the whole day could be like that, because in those days, in English schools, it was customary to begin with a short act of Christian worship. So we would maybe sing a children's hymn, maybe sing part of a psalm, and listen to somebody playing the piano, just maybe some little piece from the Anna Magdalena Bach notebook, something like that. And so I felt that this was how I wanted the whole day to be. And it kind of started each day right. Singing is like swimming. You have to have a chance to try it, to experience it, to know whether you enjoy it or not. Okay, now I can swim. I had a chance to try that. I didn't enjoy it. Really, I only go near the water for a shower. But I just knew that I loved singing, and I can't explain it. It just felt natural to me. And it's something that was part of my life from a very early age. I never knew as a child that it would play such a large part in my life later, because I'm not sure that I knew I would be a composer. That came later.
But that came not so much later, I think, because you published your first carol at the age of 18. That's the Shepherd's Pipe Carol. And you were reading music at Clare College, Cambridge at the time. So what happened when you felt that there's something in your mind, some tune, some melody maybe, and you felt, I can write this down and it all fits together?
Well, I think it was just that nobody stopped me. I was very fortunate because at high school, the director of music always took an interest in any of us boys. It was a boys' school, any of us who wanted to write music, because he was himself a composer, and a good one, as a matter of fact. And so he made, not me, but just lots of us, not only me, he made us all feel that composition was natural. It was just something that you do. And so I kind of thought, well, okay, I've got these little ideas in my head. And why did I start with Christmas carols? Well, I wrote all kinds of things, but it was my Christmas carols that first attracted the attention of somebody who became an important mentor to me at Cambridge University. This was Sir David Wilcox, the legendary director of King's College Choir. And he, at the end of one of the classes one week, I was in his class for what they used to call harmony and counterpoint, very academic. At the end of one of these classes, he said, Mr. Rutter, I hear that you have been composing. I would like to see some of your work. And so I was only, well, I was a little more than 18 by this thing. I was 19 or 20, I guess. And so I brought some of my compositions, which included some Christmas carols, for him to look over. And he was an editorial advisor for the publisher that I've been with ever since, Oxford University Press. And he said, would you be interested in these little pieces being published? And as you say, the Shepherd's Pipe Carol was among them. And I said, gosh, yes, that's wonderful. And so I made the big leap from being an aspiring composer with just great hopes. And then suddenly I was a published composer. And that was a very important difference in those days, because remember, there was no social media, no internet, no software where you could put your music on paper. It was important to have a publisher, because otherwise really you had no voice. And so I was very, very lucky, because I met somebody who was able to help me make that leap into being a published composer. So I have always been grateful to Cambridge and to Sir David Wilcox for giving me that wonderful opportunity to get started.
And then you got started, and a little later on, you founded your own choir, the Cambridge Singers, who are now your choir for over 40 years. They were founded in 1981. And I would like to ask you, what is the magic and maybe the mystery about conducting on the one side and working with a choir?
Oh, well, goodness me. I just love to work with musicians. I love to work with instrumentalists equally, but choirs are kind of my home territory. I first sang in my school choirs and church choirs, and then I came to direct choirs myself, because while I was at Cambridge University as a postgraduate, there was a vacancy for a director of music at my college, Clare College, and part of the job was to conduct the chapel choir. And so I suddenly found I was not just a composer, but I was a conductor. And I found that process very easy, really, because I went from being on the inside of a choir to being in front of a choir. And really, that's not such a big change. I knew what I could ask for, what I could not ask for. And of course, it's lovely to be in the middle of a choir, but you get the best effect when you stand or sit in front of it. And so I loved conducting from the very first and never found it difficult. And it makes a wonderful contrast to composing, because when you compose, you are ganz allein, you're completely alone. And I find that that's okay for a while, but then after a week or two of being all on my own, I want some musical company. I like to be with people and to make music together. And as a composer, you're by yourself in a room, scratching notes on paper and imagining them in your head. But to actually hear what you have written, or to hear what any composer has written when you conduct it, is something that makes my life complete. And really, there's nothing unusual about being both composer and conductor, except in the last 100 years. Because if you had talked to Johann Sebastian Bach and said, well, we're going to engage somebody else to direct your cantata, he would have said, well, why? I can direct it. But he composed and conducted. Handel did the same, Mozart did the same. Now, they didn't necessarily direct by standing in front of the musicians. They may be directed from the cembalo or whatever, but it was natural for composers and conductors to do the same thing, and for Bach to also train the voices and the instrumentalists, to be an all-round musician. And it's only really in the 20th century that you got musicians specializing. So you would have said that Herbert von Karajan was a conductor, but then, let's say, Karl Orff or somebody was a composer. And I enjoy both, because if you wanted to describe me, I hope that what you might say is musician.
As a musician, you were once asked in an interview, what is it that motivates you to compose music? And you answered, it's an urge. So an urge is not necessarily a very good feeling, does not make one so happy.
Oh, that's quite right. That it's something where you just feel compelled to do it. And the process of writing is labor intensive and slow. And as I've indicated, in a way, it's lonely, because you don't generally have any company when you're writing, or I find it's difficult during the hours I'm composing. I don't really want interruptions and noise around me. But when it becomes rewarding is when you are just putting the last note to it and that's it, it's finished. And for about 10 minutes, I want to celebrate and enjoy a nice glass of wine. And then after a while, hopefully you get the real reward of hearing the music, because when you compose, you hear a perfect performance inside your head. And your job as a conductor is to make the real performance as close as possible to the perfect performance that exists only in your imagination. And that's really where the fun happens and the reward happens. But it would never start if I didn't have the urge in the first place. And on the other hand, that isn't always the same thing as feeling like doing it. Because if you wait until you feel, oh, yes, I've got some ideas, I have some inspiration, you might wait forever. So one of the other things, Annika, that actually makes you want to compose is a deadline. Because when you have to get something written by a certain date, that does focus your mind. And I find it, up to a point, it's useful. It can, I'm afraid, become a little oppressive, that I don't like to feel I'm always under the gun, with a deadline looming. But at the same time, a deadline is useful. I think writers will tell you, journalists would certainly tell you, if they didn't have deadlines, they would never write anything.
So you talked about the perfect composition in your mind, and you try to compose it, and afterwards you try to conduct it to get to that perfect moment. might it be also that the fact that artists in general, no matter which art form they perform, like writers, composers, musicians, performing art on stage maybe, and painters as well, that they're all in search and in pursuit of this moment of completion maybe, or this perfect moment, and they hardly ever get it, and that keeps them going on.
That's so true. The way that I like to express that thought is that Saint Cecilia, who is the patron saint of musicians, is the one who brings ideas to musicians, okay? And I like to think that she is constantly flying around the earth with a sack full of fairy dust, magic dust, and she will see, oh, there's a composer down there. I think I'll sprinkle a little bit of dust on that composer, and so they'll have a good idea and a good day. And you don't always know when she's visited you, but if she does visit and the idea seems to come, and at the end of it, you say, yes, that's what I meant to write. That's a wonderful feeling, but I think any honest composer will tell you that there are pieces we've all written where I'm perfectly certain Saint Cecilia was somewhere else that day. And no fairy dust. But that's where technique comes in. You have to have enough technique as a composer to see you through the dry days, you know, where the Trocknertage, where no good ideas seem to come. And people always say, how do you cope with writer's block? They call it, you know, the days when the ideas don't seem to come to you. And the only answer that I found, and I've talked to other composers about this, is just keep trying. And sometimes if you have 3 or 4 bad days, write something, and then on the 4th day, maybe something good will come to you. It's a mysterious process. What we're always trying to do as composers is reach for a tap, you know, and we want to turn it on so the ideas will just flow. And it's very hard to control because that tap is just slightly out of reach. And sometimes you can reach up and the ideas will come, and sometimes it's just out of reach. And some days, without even reaching for it, the tap will open and the ideas will flow. There's just no way of explaining it. Everybody's creative, whether it's just creative in growing a beautiful garden, or being a good cook, or making lovely clothes. But creativity expresses itself in different ways. And the particular expression that I guess I had for whatever creativity I've got is in writing music. And how that happens, why composers get chosen, I don't know. The way that I always put this is to say that you don't choose composition as a way of life. It chooses you.
Let's get back to choir singing and the experience of singing. In the last hour, we had a workshop here about the healing qualities of music and singing, the healing powers, if you will. What's your thought on that? What power does music and singing have?
It has great power, and it's very hard to describe in words. I do believe that singing is a natural activity. Your voice is not just an instrument, it's a part of your body. And it's the part of your body that will express what is in your heart and what is in your soul. That's the extraordinary thing about the human voice. And I remember talking to a theologian once who said, he was listening to a choir, and he said, isn't it wonderful that God created sopranos and altos and tenors and basses, and they form one beautiful harmony when they are together. Music is better than words. I sometimes wish we could teach our politicians to sing, then maybe we would have a more harmonious world.
That's some picture, or some sound rather, when you imagine the politicians would sing. Quite a nice one, maybe.
It's a little bit unlikely. I think music's too good for most of them.
But there's a political, well,
I only say that because Britain is currently going through some extraordinary political turmoil. I recommend singing lessons for them all, but I don't think they will take my advice.
As far as I know, there's a band really playing. Politicians are playing in a band in Britain.
Oh, well, yes.
House of Commons band, I think.
The House of Commons band.
Yes.
Okay. There is a Parliament choir, but most of the members, I've guest conducted them, most of the members are not actually members of Parliament. They're support workers in the Palace of Westminster. And they're the people who do an awful lot of the real work behind the scenes. And they were an awfully nice choir. What interested me was whether they would take being directed. And as a matter of fact, they did. They were quite obedient, which was interesting.
So we are assembled here and in the future days to come to put together a huge choir together with the Wild Choir for Peace in Nicolmat. And we're singing a song against the war. You've just written sheet music, the Ukrainian prayer, against the war in Ukraine. What power do you think does this assembled singing might have?
Well, it certainly had more power or more spread than I ever thought it would. The story of this piece, which I wrote in March this year, is a strange one because I do public singing days in Britain on Saturdays, not necessarily for skilled singers, but for anybody who wants to come and enjoy a day's singing. And you will typically get 200, 300, 400 people just gathering together to enjoy a day of choral singing. And I had one of those planned in a church in London where they had invited me to come do it. And then the invasion happened. And I thought, I cannot face these 300 people without making some sign, some acknowledgement in music that these terrible events are happening in Ukraine. I thought I simply must find some response. And well, I suppose, what does a musician do in the face of world events? Write music. And so I found an old Ukrainian prayer. And even though I must admit I have no Ukrainian, I mean, it's one of the many languages that I don't speak, I'm afraid. But I literally overnight did an a cappella setting of this Ukrainian prayer. And I took it along to the singing day on the Saturday. And the church asked me whether they could video it to put on YouTube. And I said, okay, fine. And it was a heartfelt performance. I mean, not an immensely polished performance because I'd only just written the piece and we didn't have very long to rehearse it. But we made a video of it and it went up on YouTube. And the expression is that it went viral because I got first a trickle, then a flow, then a flood of requests for the printed score. Choirs wanted to sing it. And I thought, well, I don't want this piece to be published in the conventional way or bought or sold. I would like it to be freely available for anybody who would like to sing it. And so what I decided to do was put a PDF of it on my website. And anybody was welcome to download it. And what astonished us was the flood of requests we had for it. And I think it's slowed down now, but within the first month, we must have sent out about 10,000 PDFs, almost all of which were for a choir to duplicate and copy and sing. And these requests came from 83 different countries, which is extraordinary. And I made a suggestion on the website that, look, this is free, but if you wish to make a donation to a Ukrainian relief charity, then I'm sure they would appreciate it. And many people wrote back and said, yes, we have donated money, or your piece was part of a fundraising concert that we have given, and it was a great success, and so on. And my assistant here, Emma, made a calculation that if something like half the people who ordered it on behalf of the choir had made donations roughly equivalent to what the music would have cost if they had purchased it, then the funds that would have raised for Ukrainian humanitarian medical relief and so on would have come to maybe, this is in pounds, but it's similar to euros, something like £500,000. Now that's more money than I think I've ever raised with anything else I've ever done. And of course, it wasn't me that raised it. It was the generosity of all the people who gave the money and the enterprise of the choirs who decided to hold fundraising concerts. But it does illustrate how music can have an influence. I think maybe influence is a better word than power. Einfluss rather than Macht. But yet, people did write and say that those who listened to the music were moved and wanted to make gestures of their own, of help and support, to bring peace. Please bring peace. And so it was only something I literally wrote overnight. I didn't have longer than that, but it has gone out, and I know Nicole has masterminded a virtual performance in Germany, and there have been others all over the place. And that's something at the beginning of this year, 2022, I could never have predicted. So it was a surprise, but I hope that it does illustrate in some way that music can make a difference. It can make a difference.
We're going to see and hear that Ukrainian prayer at the end of our workshop. And you're still able to order the sheet notes from the address that is put down in the chat box, as I see right now. At that moment, I would like to open the round to everybody to ask questions to John Rutter, if you have got any questions.
I'll tell you the one question no composer can answer. Where do you get your ideas from? We don't know. Maybe it's Saint Cecilia, but she's just a symbol.
It's definitely her. If there are no immediate questions, I would like to put another question to you about the influence, as you said, of choirs and the influence about singing against war or about war even. I read that as a chorus, you took part in the first recording of Britain's War Requiem under the composer's baton, I think, and it was in 1963. So
you know everything about me. Goodness.
I just read bits and pieces. I don't know everything.
Yes. Well, the year was 1963. I sang in my school choir, which was a good choir. And we were sopranos, altos, tenors, and basses. But for the purposes of the War Requiem recording, it was just the sopranos and altos that were required. And Benjamin Britten wanted them to be boys because he especially liked the sound, the timbre of boys' voices. And I don't know really why my school choir got invited to take part in the iconic Decca recording, but we did get invited. Maybe the Coventry Cathedral boys, they sang in the first performance in 1961. Maybe they were not invited. No, there was nothing wrong with them musically. They were a good choir, but they were not in London. And the recording had to take place in London because that's where recordings generally happen. And so our school choir was called upon, and it was a great honor. And my director of music made a wonderful deal with the Decca Record Company. He said, okay, we will give our services free, and any record company loves the sound of that. But we would like any of the boys who are especially interested to be allowed to listen to all of the sessions, not just the sessions where they're required. Many sessions were scheduled because it was a new work. Nobody knew it at that time. It was thought to be quite difficult. And so Decca allocated almost a week of recording sessions. You wouldn't get that now because it's become standard repertoire. But we were part of an amazing cast of singers and instrumentalists because, as you say, we had Benjamin Britten himself conducting, and he was a wonderful conductor. He had the gift, like Pierre Boulez had, of pinpoint control in a small way, that he didn't throw himself around. He didn't need to. He just was able to control things mentally. And there were 250 of us because there was the London Symphony Orchestra, the Bach Choir, which was almost 200 voices. So in fact, yes, we must have been 300 of us. The Melos Ensemble, the chamber orchestra, and our three amazing soloists, because we had Galina Wisniewskaja as the soprano, Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau, still at the height of his powers, and Peter Pears as the tenor. And so I was there up in a high balcony, which is where they placed us in the old Kingsway Hall for the recording sessions, looking down on this. And it started quite amazingly because when the sessions were due to start, the three soloists walked on, but Galina Wisniewskaja did not like where her chair had been placed. Because if you know the War Requiem, the soprano soloist has to be in front of the main chorus, and the two male soloists are to one side. And she wanted to be with the two other soloists and not in front of the chorus. But of course, that was not Benjamin Britten's concept. Anyway, she walked on and looked at the chair and Aurore, Schreck. And she said in Russian, I'm not sitting there. And they said, well, you've got to, because that's where the soloists, the microphones are all set up. Niet. And that made no impression. And so she started screaming. And she could scream for Russia. It was extraordinary. And of course, they sent people from the recording team to try and pacify her and say, really, it'll be fine. Just, please be calm, sit down. And she just got more agitated. And in the end, the very grand figure of the producer, John Culshaw, walked in and he led her off, still screaming. And that was the end of the first recording session before it even started. I was watching all this, remember, from the top balcony, and I thought, what on earth's going on? And you could still hear the screams because there were no proper dressing rooms in the Kingsway Hall. I think they stuffed her in a broom cupboard. And I can only reconstruct what happened next from John Culshaw's memoirs, but he said that they got on the phone to Rostropovich, her husband, in Russia. They never let them both out at once in case they defected, which of course to the West, which in the end they did. But there he was back in Russia. And it was much more difficult in 1963 to make contact by telephone from London to Russia, but they managed it. And, she didn't listen to very many people, but she did listen to her husband. And he said, oh, come on, get on with it. Just do the job. This is for Ben. Rostropovich and Benjamin Britten were very close, of course. And so we were all sent home. Not one note recorded in the first session. And we were asked to come back the next day. And the same thing happened. The three soloists walked on and she sat down very meekly in the chair where she should have sat 24 hours earlier. And then the recording started. And it was a remarkable experience that somehow the pity of war, which was what Benjamin Britten said was the motto in his head, the theme, that was expressed in an absolutely new and remarkable way. And we can't, I think, now listen to the War Requiem in quite the same way they did in 1963, because then the audiences consisted of people who had experienced the horror of war. And thank goodness we have had an era of peace. And, oh, please, I hope that it returns. And so we have got younger listeners who've got different ears, different experience. But for us in 1963, it was quite shattering. And I was part of it, of course. And I think we knew that it would become a renowned work. And I'm sure Nicole had in his mind something of that experience when he formed his Choir for Peace, because really that is the motto, the moral of what the War Requiem is all about. It ends with "Let us sleep now" and "Kyrie eleison," Lord have mercy, and let us hope and pray for peace. It took me years to digest that experience, I think, but it certainly made a difference to me. And when I came to write a requiem myself, I know that I wanted to combine Latin and English, which Benjamin Britten had done. And yet my requiem is very different from his because it's obviously much shorter and much smaller, but I hope that it carries a message of consolation. I'm still not sure whether the Britten War Requiem does have that message of consolation. It's maybe consolation, but mixed with warning and with a sense of horror. And that's not the kind of music that the horror, the experience of war and conflict is not something I feel that I really have it in me to express musically. Shostakovich was able to do that. I mean, if you listen to his symphonies, you kind of hear the whole terrible history of Stalinist Russia sort of in music. And I think I tend to be more comfortable on the sunny side of life and with hope rather than with horror or despair. That, I think, is just perhaps a reflection of my personality.
John Rutter, thank you so much for sharing this extraordinary experience with all of us. We've got some questions now, and I don't know, am I going to put the questions or is Helen going to put the questions?
Helen is doing the question because she's from our team and she's from the UK too.
That's good.
Hello, John.
Hello.
Nice to see you again. And we've got so many beautiful questions in chat and people saying how much they love your music. And Ati at the moment is singing your Requiem.
Aha!
A lot of people are really, really loving what you do. Michael Rowe has asked, do you write the words first or the music when you write songs?
Oh, well, my first thought is for the words if I'm writing a choral piece, and I much prefer not to have to write my own words. I prefer to find words, if it's a sacred piece, in some reputable source like the Bible or the prayer book or liturgy or religious poetry, say. Only if I cannot find words that say exactly what I want to say do I then start to write words of my own. And the words and the music kind of creep forward together. You were talking earlier about the Shepherd's Pipe Carol as one of my very first pieces. And I think I imagined that little phrase, on the way to Bethlehem. The words and the music belonged together from the start. I find writing words harder than writing music because although I was trained to write music, I was never trained to write words. And so to discipline myself and make the words fit the music and express what I want to express is always a tough discipline, but it's one that I quite enjoy. So I think it's some and some. Words and music often come together.
I think the Shepherd's Pipe Carol was my first choral experience in Wells Cathedral, so that has a memory. We have a question from Cornelia, I don't know if that's how you pronounce your name, who has asked, what will be your next composition? Ooh, do you know?
Oh, well, I know exactly what it's going to be because I have to write it next week, and it's not a very good one, but surprise, surprise, it's a Christmas carol for a charity concert in December. They said that I don't have to write it, except that if I don't write it, they'll kill me. It motivates you a bit. And so I've said, okay, I will write it. And that is next week's little task. And beyond that, all sorts of plans for 2023. There's a lot of substantial things that I would like to do that I've had to put on hold. I am dipping my toes into writing for films and television.
Exciting.
Not choral, but it is a form of, I love writing for orchestra and I love drama and films. And so maybe that will be something that I'll get around to in 2023. So those are the next projects. Oh, and in January, what have I promised to write? I can't remember, but I promised to write it anyway. Oh yes, it's for a little piece for choral again, for a visit to Dallas, Texas in February, an old friend. So.
Oh, we've got lots of exciting projects coming up then.
I'm never short of things to do.
We've got.
I don't believe me. I don't sit at home staring at the wallpaper. You know, there's all. Carry on. What's next?
Well, we had from Berghoff asked. Actually, just says don't have any questions, but they just wanted to thank you for your beautiful music.
Oh, no thanks needed. It's what I do. I mean, you know, I'm too old to train for anything different. And so I think I will carry on.
It's a very good idea because we're all loving your music. Let me look through. Oh, Eliza says that her choir has also performed parts of your Requiem. Very much enjoyed it. So it looks like lots of people are singing your music at the moment. Susanna wants to know, what is your favorite Christmas carol?
Well, do you mean just in general?
I'm not sure, Susanna. Do you mean in general?
My favorite carol, probably I would say In Dulce Jubilo, back from the 15th century. If there was ever a tune and a set of words that the angels sang, that must be it. I think it's celestial in an absolutely wonderful way. As for my own carols, it's the same answer for any of my music. My favorite is always the one I haven't written yet. But the next one will be a little better. And we learn from our mistakes, and looking at your own music is a bit like looking in the mirror. It's something, admiring yourself in the mirror is not a very good thing to do. And I positively avoid looking in the mirror, I have to say. I may be 27 inside, but the outside doesn't look like that. No, I just believe in doing my best with each piece that I write, and I hope that the next one may perhaps be better.
I think you write amazing music. I'm conducting my choir at Frome College, and we're going to be singing one of your carols as well this Christmas in Wilson. There's a big Somerset get together for all of the kids across Somerset, so it'll be lovely. It'll be really nice. Yeah. Are there any more questions from people? Which is the composer you like most? Gosh.
Johann Sebastian Bach is at the top of my personal tree, because I think he's the composer, if I only had one to listen to for the rest of my life, he's the only composer who could withstand that. I would never grow tired of Bach, and I would always hear something different in it. I think he represents the perfect blend of head and heart. That he can move you to tears, and yet he can make you gasp with amazement at his sheer compositional technique. There was nothing he couldn't do. And his invention was inexhaustible. One of my favorite companions is a complete box set that Suzuki did in Japan of all the cantatas. And I just pick out a CD. I'm still very old-fashioned. I actually play physical CDs. If I'm doing some little task like dusting or cleaning or just sticking orchestral parts together, whatever, I just pick a cantata CD at random, and I know that I will have a treat. Of course, there are hundreds of other composers I love and revere and admire, but I think it had to be one. For me personally, it has to be Bach.
Mm-hmm. Were there any composers who really inspired you while you were young? Obviously, Benjamin.
Well, yes, that's interesting, because the sort of composer heroes of mine. This is an English one. William Walton always had just a wonderful sense of excitement that I have always enjoyed, and lovely melancholy as well. I adored and still do Gershwin for the wonderful energy and melodic invention and all of that he has. And Mozart was always, I remember when I was very young, I could listen to the 40th Symphony, the G minor symphony. I had an LP of it, and I played it over and over and over. And the 23rd Piano Concerto, the A488, the A major one, I just played them and played them and played them. Whether they inspired me or not, I don't know, but I do know that I loved them.
Lovely. Well, I think I've asked everybody's questions, although there is a German question now at the bottom of the list. Martina.
Yeah. I can ask it. I translate it. Yeah, it's from Sabine. It's in German. She means, will you be with your choir, with the Cambridge Singers someday in Germany conducting?
Oh, I wish. I made a decision when I established the Cambridge Singers a long time ago. It was it was a little after 1981, I think it was about 1982 or 3. I made a resolution that we would concentrate on recording. And that's because I didn't want to go into the business of being a touring choir. if you want to do that, like the 16 or the Tallis Scholars or Tenebrae or any of those English professional chamber choirs, you have to get into the business of being a travel agent, of doing fundraising, of program planning, and you have to have an appetite for travel, which I've slightly lost. I love being in other places, but I really don't enjoy airports and flights and finding somewhere to park and all of that. All of that is something I've done a great deal of, and it's bad enough taking just me, but if I had to take a whole choir with me around on tour, I think I would wear myself out and I would never get any composing done. So sadly, the Cambridge Singers is not going to become a concert choir unless I have a change of heart. Maybe I will change my mind. But for the moment, I prefer to make recordings because, well, A, yes, you don't have to travel, and B, whereas a concert will give pleasure, you hope, that night, but it's all gone the next morning. A recording, you hope, may potentially continue to give pleasure for many years to come. And that is perhaps the composer in me. I would like to leave something lasting, and ephemeral experiences like concerts. Maybe if they go well, they give you a sort of high while they happen, but then the next day it's all gone. And speaking for myself, after I've conducted a concert, I'm just worrying about the next thing I have to do. And so I prefer recording. A lot of musicians don't really like recordings. They say that they find it a little bit antiseptic, just singing to an empty room and a red light. I don't mind that a bit. I enjoy recording. I positively enjoy the recording process. I try to always capture pieces complete as far as I can, and not to record in tiny little short segments and stick it together. But I actually find recording a positive experience. And so I continue to make records, not as many as I did, because of course the bottom has dropped out of the record industry. That whereas in the early days of CD, you could record almost anything and get your money back, because people would buy CDs and there was so much repertoire never recorded before. It's very much harder now. The market for recordings has shrunk. Physical CDs are a sunset technology. Even downloading is on the way out. And streaming is something which doesn't, for me, feel quite like real recording, that there it is in a cloud somewhere. But I must say, I still like a recording you can actually hold in your hand and put in a CD player. But it's now the case. I think you have to make a very careful decision before you make a recording. You have to have a good reason to make a recording. In the 1980s, as I said, you could record more or less what you liked. And I had some wonderful early years with my own record label. And now I have to look very carefully at each project.
Mm-hmm. Wow. John, you've been fantastic. And I'm not sure what the plan is now, whether I should return to Martina, who has done an amazing job today. Thank you so much, Martina. John, it's been lovely having you with us. It really, truly has.
My pleasure. And so it's now an hour has gone by very quickly. Thank you for your company, everybody. It's been a pleasure to spend this time with you. And I believe you're going to hear the Ukrainian player to finish with. So,
yes, we're going to hear it now. And my thanks go out to you. It was such a pleasure talking to you. So thank you, John Rutter.
Let me give you a goodbye wave and say thank you for being with me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Anka. Thank you, Helen. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And can I just mention to you all, if anybody wants to become a member, or this workshop has been free for you today, and I hope you've all really enjoyed it and got a lot from it. If anyone wants to make a donation to the World Choir for Peace, we'll be really grateful, because it goes towards all of these projects and fantastic things that you can all take part in. I'm going to put a link in the chat. It's entirely up to you. But it's been such a pleasure seeing you all. It's been a pleasure with John. I've had a fantastic time, and I hope you have too.
Ja, vielen, vielen Dank, Helen Ostawiew. Das war ganz wunderbar. Jetzt bin ich wieder im Deutschen gelandet. Fühlt sich ungewohnt an, gerade nach diesen wirklich wunderbaren Worten und tollen Erfahrungen, die John Rutter mit uns teilen konnte. Als nächstes würden wir tatsächlich dann das ukrainische Gebet, Ukrainian Prayer, hören und sehen. Und meine Bitte an alle ist, die noch Lust haben, ein bisschen danach zu bleiben. Wir würden ganz gerne auch ein Feedback einsammeln über die vergangenen Workshops. Das wäre ganz toll, wenn jemand noch Lust hat, uns nachher zu sagen, wie es ihm gefallen hat, was er oder sie vielleicht mitnimmt. Das wäre sehr schön. Und ich bedanke mich sehr für diese tolle Runde. Und jetzt hören wir, Klaus Liebermann wird das möglich machen, und sehen wir diese Komposition von John Rutter, umgesetzt von Nicole Matt und dem World Peace Choir. Боже, Україну